It's 1965. A high school somewhere in Indiana. Wooden desks, chalkboard, 30 students waiting for the assignment. The teacher writes 2 positions on the board, sides in a debate. Then he divides the room and starts pointing. One student raises his hand. He's been assigned the side he disagrees with. He says so. The teacher looks at him for a moment. You can't defeat an argument you don't understand. That was the entire lesson. The debate came after. The lesson was that sentence. That class was a graduation requirement in most American school districts in 1965. Today, formal debate is offered in fewer than 14% of American public schools. Most of those are in wealthier districts. Most of the rest dropped it quietly, without announcement, sometime from 1975 to 2000. The class disappeared. So did the skill it built, and it wasn't the only one. Before 1970, American public schools taught a set of skills that shared a single purpose: not to produce happy students, not to produce employed ones, to produce a person who could follow an argument, construct a position, and defend it under pressure. That was the explicit goal. It was written into curricula. It was tested and graded. The skills themselves were specific. Formal debate, mandatory in most districts, evaluated on the quality of the logic, not the volume of the delivery. Rhetoric, not as a style, but as a subject. The study of how arguments are built, why some hold and others collapse, and how to tell the difference between the two. Memorization, the Gettysburg Address, passages of the Constitution, Shakespeare's soliloquies, not as performance. As training, the practice of holding complex language in the mind long enough to understand what it was actually saying. Penmanship mattered because writing by hand is slower than typing. The thought had to form before the hand moved. The hand couldn't outrun the mind. Mental arithmetic, working a problem through without a tool, building the habit of process over shortcut. None of these were electives. They were the core of the curriculum. A student who graduated in 1962 had spent 12 years practicing all of them. The curriculum described above was not invented in America. It was borrowed. The framework had been in use in European education for roughly 1,000 years, and American educators inherited it without always knowing its name. The trivium. 3 stages, 3 tools, 1 outcome. The first stage was grammar, not spelling rules and punctuation, but the precise meaning of words, how language works, what a term actually contains before you use it in an argument. The second stage was logic, the rules by which one idea follows from another, not whether a conclusion feels right, whether it is valid, whether the premises support it, how to recognize the difference between a persuasive argument and a sound one. The third stage was rhetoric, how to construct and deliver an argument that moves people, and equally, how to recognize when someone is doing that to you. These 3 in sequence produced a specific kind of person, someone who read carefully, thought clearly, and could not easily be fooled by confident language dressed up as evidence. American educators rarely taught the trivium by name, but its structure sat inside the standard pre-1970 curriculum in every subject. The graduates of that system wrote the laws, argued the cases, and built the institutions that shaped the country for a century. Back to that Indiana classroom, the student who objected. He wanted to argue what he believed. That seems reasonable. Most people, given a choice, will defend the position they already hold. It feels natural. It feels honest. The teacher said no. And the reason is the most important thing in this video. When you are required to argue a position you disagree with, to find its best evidence, build its strongest case, and anticipate every counterargument, something specific happens. You are forced to separate the idea from the feeling. You hold the argument at arm's length and examine it on its own terms, independent of whether you like where it points. That separation is the core of critical thinking. Without it, reasoning becomes something else. It becomes rationalization, finding evidence for what you already believe and calling the process thinking. The technical term for the exercise is steel manning. constructing the strongest possible version of an opposing position before engaging with it. The opposite, arguing against the weakest version of what someone believes, has a name too. It's called a straw man. It's the dominant form of public argument in America today. Debate class trained people to stop doing that. It made them uncomfortable in the process. They lost rounds. They argued positions that felt wrong. They had to sit with the discomfort of understanding something they opposed. That discomfort was the curriculum. Then the class disappeared. There is a teaching method named for a man who was executed for asking too many questions. Socrates never lectured, he asked. His students would offer an answer, and he would respond with another question, not to embarrass them, but to follow the thought further than it had gone. Why do you believe that? What would have to be true for the opposite to be correct? What evidence would change your mind? American teachers, at their best, did the same. Not as a philosophical exercise, as a daily practice. A student who spent 12 years in classrooms where every answer prompted a question developed a specific reflex. Before accepting a conclusion, ask what's underneath it. That reflex is the difference between a person who thinks and a person who reacts. The Socratic method is impossible to grade on a standardized test. There is no correct answer to what would change your mind. There is only a better or worse quality of thinking in the response. Quality of thinking cannot be bubbled in on a Scantron sheet. The method didn't disappear because anyone decided it was worthless. It disappeared because the systems built around American education gradually stopped rewarding it. And what isn't rewarded stops being taught. And what stops being taught stops being practiced. And what stops being practiced stops existing in the room. In 1965, Congress passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The intent was equity. Schools in poor districts received almost no federal support. The act tied federal funding to student achievement, ensuring that underfunded schools could access resources they had never had. The motivation was genuine. The instrument was measurement. Achievement meant scores. Scores required standardized tests. Standardized tests required standardized answers. A question with a standardized answer can be graded at scale, cheaply, consistently. Debate does not have a standardized answer. Neither does a Socratic dialogue. Neither does an essay arguing both sides of a question. Schools began allocating time toward what was measured: reading comprehension scores, math computation benchmarks, later, science standards. Each reallocation felt reasonable. Each one quietly displaced something that could not be tested. Formal logic was gone from most American curricula by the early 1980s. Speech and debate by 2000 had been reclassified as extracurricular in the majority of public school districts, optional, reliant on volunteer coaches, available mainly where parents had the resources to fund it. The sequence was simple. What isn't measured loses its protected time. What loses its protected time loses its teachers. What loses its teachers disappears from the room. No single person made that decision. It was made one budget meeting at a time, across 50 states, over 30 years. By 1968, something else was happening. Students and progressive educators were pushing back against the curriculum itself, against memorization, recitation, grammar drills, formal debate. The argument was not unreasonable. Why force a student to memorize the Gettysburg Address if no one has explained why it matters? Why diagram a sentence when no one speaks that way outside of a classroom? The critique had weight. Rote learning without meaning is mechanical. A student who can recite the preamble but has never understood it has learned almost nothing. The replacements came quickly: journal writing, open discussion, student-led projects, personal narrative essays, creative expression. These were genuinely valuable. They gave students a voice and an investment in what they were learning. Memorization was called mechanical. Formal debate was called rigid. Grammar drills were called oppressive. What replaced them could engage a student's emotions and experiences. What it could not do was teach a student to evaluate a source, follow a syllogism, or recognize when an argument was valid and when it only sounded that way. The friction disappeared. The exercises that were hard, uncomfortable, and felt pointless in the moment, losing a debate round, answering a question with another question, being made to hold a position you disagreed with, those were the ones that built the specific muscle. Thinking well requires practice at thinking badly. The discomfort was not a flaw in the curriculum, it was the mechanism. The geography failures are easy to point at. They produce the clips that circulate online. They are also the least important consequence of what was removed. The more serious loss is harder to see because it looks like something else. A three-step logical argument, premise, conclusion, is the basic unit of formal reasoning. A person trained in debate or logic processes it automatically. The structure was drilled into them over years until it became reflex. A person who never received that training encounters the same argument as something abstract, complicated, or partisan. Not because they are unintelligent, because the tool for processing it was never placed in their hands. This is why complex policy gets reduced to slogans. Not because the public lacks the capacity for nuance, because the framework for holding nuance was never given to them. The consequence shows up in a hospital room. A patient cannot evaluate two competing medical claims on their merits and defaults to whichever source sounds most certain. The outcome follows. It shows up in a financial decision. An investor cannot follow the logic of what is being proposed and trust the salesman's confidence instead of the prospectus's structure. The loss follows. It shows up in every courtroom, every election, every room where evidence is supposed to determine the outcome. The skills weren't decoration, they were the infrastructure. That student in Indiana eventually graduated. Years later, this is not documented, but it is consistent. He probably understood why the teacher said no, why he was made to argue the wrong side, why understanding the argument he opposed was not optional. The skills described in this video were not accidents of a better era. They were not the natural product of a simpler time. They were given by specific people who understood what they were giving. A teacher who ran debate rounds and graded on the quality of the logic, not the volume of the conviction. A parent who made you explain your position before they responded to it. A grandparent who handed you the newspaper and asked what you thought, and when you said you didn't know, said that was where the conversation started, not where it ended. Those people passed something forward. They did it one classroom at a time, one dinner table at a time, without knowing the full value of what they were handing over. The skills are not gone from every room in America. They are quieter than they used to be. They survive where someone decided to keep teaching them, not because the curriculum required it, but because they remembered what it was like to receive them. If a teacher, a parent, anyone in your life made you argue the wrong side of something, sat you down with a position you disagreed with, and wouldn't let you leave until you understood it, put their name in the comments. Because those people are the reason critical thinking didn't disappear completely. It was carried forward by hand. More of what America forgot is waiting.